Samuel Pepys' Final Days, a graphic and humorous account, as told by Pepys himself. Ah, well, here I am, Samuel Pepys, about to shuffle off this mortal coil. My dearest friends, I thought it rather fitting to write one final account of my life's follies and fortunes, this time not in my dear diary, but in a proper jesting style. After all, why should a man take life so seriously when death is knocking with its bony knuckles on the door? My eyesight has dwindled, my bladder is as rebellious as ever, and if I'm to croak soon, might as well have some fun before I pop off. Let me begin by telling you, in these last wretched days, my body is a shipwreck, and my soul's the captain who's long since given up trying to steer. Oh, the aches, the pains. If I were a building, the scaffolding would have fallen off years ago. But, Lord, what tales I have to tell. So here it is, my life in all its ludicrous glory, before they plant me in the ground like some old turnip. My youth, a mess of misfortunes. As a boy, I was about as useful as a candle in the midday sun. Lord knows how I survived. My head was too large for my body too weak for my will, and my will too weak for much of anything useful. I was more interested in playing games than learning arithmetic, and whenever I tried to show some sense of dignity, I usually ended up with my face in a pile of dung or tripping over my own oversized feet. Ah, but those were the days, when my biggest worry was not appearing an idiot. How far we've come. The Navy and other nonsense. I can't talk about my life without mentioning my role in the Navy. Ah, yes, Clerk of the Acts. A title that sounds impressive, but really it just meant I spent my days swimming through a sea of paperwork, quite the opposite of what I imagined when I thought of the high seas. Did you think I was out there, battling Dutch ships and waving swords? Nay, my friends. I was battling quills and ink bottles, and the only thing I waved was my hand to shoo off that lazy apprentice of mine. Still, I managed to make the Royal Navy something other than a collection of sinking tubs. I once thought myself very clever, negotiating contracts, inspecting ships, and keeping the King's Navy afloat, until the Dutch came and burned half of it to the ground. Now, that was a pickle. And there I was, standing on the shore, watching the flames lick the masts, thinking, well, Samuel, you've done it now. But of course, I put on my most serious face and muttered about the state of England, then dashed home to write it all in my diary. And, oh, the satisfaction of pretending I was indispensable, even though most days I felt like a puffed-up rooster in a barn full of actual hens doing all the work. The Great Plague, fleas, rats, and me. Speaking of dire situations, let me not forget the Great Plague. The rats were running the show then, you know. They were multiplying faster than my own mistakes. People dropping dead like flies, houses marked with red crosses as if to say, don't come in here unless you're fond of the smell of death. And what did I do? I stayed inside, thinking I could outweed a plague with nothing but a decent diet and a stiff upper lip. I even wrote in my diary, Lord, preserve us all from this dreadful death. A fine sentiment, but I mostly just wanted to preserve my own arse, thank you very much. I had a front row seat to the plague, if the front row is 2 streets away, peeking through my window while others fled to the countryside. Every time I heard a cart rattling down the road, I thought, here comes Old Death with his basket full of bodies, and I wasn't eager to join the collection. I was careful though, until, one morning, a rat scurried across my bed. I let out such a shriek, you'd have thought it was the end of days. Perhaps it was for the rat, my maid was swift with the broom. The Great Fire of London, everything's fine. Now, the fire, oh, the fire. Let me tell you, when London burns, it burns properly. I'll never forget the sight of those flames, roaring like a great beast. Buildings crumbling, people running, and what did I do? I ran to bury my Parmesan cheese in the garden, of course. That was my first priority. If the city's going to burn, at least let a man save his snacks. You see, there's logic in my madness. I ran around like a chicken without a head that day, darting between my house and the Tower of London, trying to give advice as if I were the King's chief fireman. Pull down houses, I said. Fire breaks. I had no idea what I was talking about, but I certainly looked authoritative. Meanwhile, the city was turning into a pile of ash, and I was mostly thinking about how damn hot it was getting. Once it was over, I collapsed in my chair and thought, well, Pepys, you didn't stop the fire, but at least you didn't burn along with it. My dear wife, Elizabeth. Oh, How could I speak of my life without mentioning my poor wife, Elizabeth? She was a fine woman, long-suffering, mostly because of me. I wasn't always the model of fidelity, you see. A man of my standing had, let's say, temptations. There were maids, and ladies, and perhaps even the odd serving wench. But I confess it here, on my deathbed, I was never good at getting away with it. My wife had an eye sharper than any blade, and more than once, I found myself explaining why I'd come home late or why my wig smelled of perfume. Lord, the excuses I invented. But she tolerated me, mostly, and we had our good moments. She once caught me eyeing another woman at the theater and gave me such a look that I felt my blood run cold. Samuel, she said, if your eyes wander one more time, they'll not be the only things wandering away from this house. And so, I looked straight ahead, like a loyal dog. What else could a man do? I had to keep both my head and my household in order. Final thoughts, the end is nigh. And so, here I lie, waiting for the inevitable. My body has failed me, this damned bladder stone, my old foe, will likely be the end of me. I remember the surgery I had years ago to remove one the size of a tennis ball, I kid you not. They cut into me, and out it came, but now it feels as if its smaller, angrier cousin is back for revenge. As the end approaches, I can't help but think, what a curious life, full of trials, tribulations, and more than a few missteps. But it was never dull, I'll say that. I lived through kings, wars, plagues, fires, and all manner of scandal, and I recorded it all for posterity. Some might say I was vain, writing so much about myself. To that, I say, who wouldn't want to read about Samuel Pepys? If nothing else, let history remember me as the man who buried his cheese when the city was burning. And with that, I bid you farewell. Should you come across a rat or a quill, think fondly of old Samuel Pepys, clerk, diarist, and the finest fool in all of London.